The length of Armenia's railway network is reported in almost all sources as approximately 700 kilometers. Overall, during the Soviet era, freight volumes were incomparably larger. For instance, in 1989, total freight volume in Armenia reached around 300 million tons, of which rail freight accounted for roughly 30 to 33 million tons, according to various sources. Here, however, lies an important nuance. During the Soviet period, the Transcaucasian railway network was administratively divided into two sections. One part comprised the railway networks of Armenia and Georgia, while the other included Azerbaijan's railways, which also encompassed the Megri and Ijevan sectors. Furthermore, the section stretching from Norashan, present-day Sharur, in Nakhchivan up to the Armenian border, was also integrated into the Yerevan division of the Transcaucasian Railway. This precise factor explains the discrepancies in freight data, as the Statistical Committee of Armenia only published data pertaining to the Yerevan division of the Transcaucasian Railway. As a result, particularly in the late 1980s, official statistics recorded rail freight volume at around 20 million tons. If we also factor in the Megri section, various sources indicate that up to a maximum of 10 to 12 million tons of cargo passed through it annually in the late 1980s. Thus, it can be concluded that in the final years of the Soviet era, total rail freight transit across Armenian territory reached approximately 32 to 33 million tons. Following that period, especially beginning in 1993, a sharp decline occurred. By the mid-1990s, rail freight volume dropped to around 700,000 tons, while overall freight fell to 2.5 million tons. A gradual recovery began in the late 1990s. While rail freight still stood at around 700,000 tons in 1998, it reached 1.4 million tons by 1999. In 2007, rail freight volume approached 3 million tons. Simultaneously, overall freight volume stabilized at around 17 to 20 million tons annually, a level that has largely been maintained to this day. During the initial years of Soviet rule, Armenia inherited the Erum-Gyumri-Masiz-Yerevan-Yerask railway line, which extended all the way to Julfa. Armenian territory held transit significance, connecting the Soviet Union with Iran and Turkey. As is well known, relations between the Soviet Union and Turkey were quite active, particularly during the 1920s. At that time, two Turkish consulates operated in Armenia, one in Yerevan and another in Leninakan, present-day Gyumri. This also contributed to active rail freight transit along the Gyumri to Kars direction. One reason was that this railway had been constructed toward Kars back during the Russian Empire, sharing the same broad gauge as the rest of Armenia's and the Soviet Union's rail system. That is, the broad gauge line continued as far as Saru-Kamush, after which a narrower gauge track began, which could not support heavy freight and passenger transport with the same efficiency. Instead, the Sari-Kamish-Kars-Gyumri-Tbilisi route was heavily utilized, and the trade turnover and cargo volumes recorded there in the late 1920s were never repeated until the collapse of the Soviet Union. Given the country's mountainous terrain, Armenia's railways, which were originally engineered for high-volume freight, were also significantly modernized during the Soviet period. Consequently, they possess considerable throughput capacity and are designed for high-tonnage transport. In this respect, Armenia's core railway infrastructure remains in good condition. In 2013, proposals from the Turkish research center AVM regarding unblocking regional communications and transport corridors outlined two potential options for a corridor through Armenia to connect Turkey with Azerbaijan. The first option passes through the north, namely via Gyumri, Vanadzor, Fioletovo, and Ijevan, while the second runs along the Aras River through Megri and Nakhchivan. This concept has been discussed for a long time and makes complete sense from a geographic standpoint. If fully completed, the northern route would be about 140 kilometers shorter than the southern route, and around 100 kilometers shorter, even slightly more, than the Karsakal-Kalaki or Kars-Gyumri-Tbilisi routes. Moreover, among existing rail connections, the Kars-Gyumri-Tbilisi route, which can link Kars to Baku, is only about 5 kilometers longer than the Karsakal-Kalaki line Yet it traverses far more favorable terrain. For example, from Salka to the Javaketi Plateau, trains operate with 3 locomotives due to extreme gradients and elevation changes. The track climbs from roughly 1,000 meters to 1,800 to 1,900 meters above sea level, featuring an exceedingly steep elevation profile. In our case, a similar section exists only along the Tumanyan to Vanadzor stretch, where 2 locomotives are required to move heavy loads. Therefore, among all available options, Armenia's northern sector is the most optimal. Furthermore, it is even shorter than the path via Megri, as the Megri route is the longest of all potential alternatives. Geographic constraints, particularly in the Megri section, would inevitably impact both line capacity and travel speed. The northern route is also vital for another reason. The main South Caucasus Railway artery, connecting the Caspian Sea coast to the Black Sea coast, built back in the Tsarist era, is a double-track line. This delivers immense throughput capacity. During the Soviet era, cargo volume along Azerbaijan's railways reached around 90 to 92 million tons per year, particularly after the Spitak earthquake. This massive capacity was made possible specifically by the double-track line running through flat terrain. That line also runs very close to the Armenian border. It reaches Gazak, from where the section that can be restored and reconnected to Armenia's railway network begins. If focus were directed to this alignment, its rehabilitation would cost significantly less. At the same time, it must be noted that Azerbaijan has a strategic objective to establish a connection with Nakhchivan. From that perspective, the route via Nakhchivan is equally important for establishing communication between Armenia and Iran toward Julfa. As mentioned earlier, Julfa served as the primary hub connecting to Iran since the Tsarist era, which is precisely why the rail line was extended to Yerevan. Interestingly, under the original design, the railway was not intended to pass through Yerevan at all. It was planned to run across the Masis Plain. Only after protests from the Yerevan City Duma was a decision made to construct a separate branch line into Yerevan. If the Gazak sector is reopened, followed later by the Aku-Rik-Gyumri rail connection, an even shorter transit option between Azerbaijan and Turkey will be established. If we speak of road freight rather than rail, a more optimal route simply does not exist in the South Caucasus. For instance, if traveling through Georgia via the shortest road route, one crosses Gazak, heads up toward Marne Uli, proceeds to Tsalka, traverses the mountainous Javaketi region, crosses the Posov-Ardahan border checkpoint, enters Turkey, and reaches Kars. In effect, this bypasses northern Armenia entirely before arriving in Kars. If one chooses the route via Megri, it again requires a vast southern detour to reach Kars. Under these conditions, the route through northern Armenia has no real alternative. It is approximately 140 to 150 kilometers shorter than the other options. Additionally, there is only one significant mountain pass along the entire alignment. The road climbs somewhat along the Fio-Letovo to Vanadzor section, but the terrain remains quite favorable. The other is the Jajur Pass, where constructing a tunnel would make the route even more convenient and efficient. Thus, the northern route holds a clear geographic advantage. It is shorter, while also providing major political and economic benefits. This route features hubs and branch lines connecting to all major centers across the South Caucasus. Moving toward western Azerbaijan, it leads directly to the country's second largest city, Gyanja. From there, one can easily reach Tbilisi and subsequently enter Armenia via Ijevan, Dilijan, Vanadzor, and Gyumri. This means the road passes through Armenia's second and third largest cities, key northern economic hubs, as well as Dilijan as a major tourism destination. By contrast, along the southern route, the path leads through places like Imishli and Horadiz, after which it runs mostly through sparsely populated territories. Within Armenia, there are likewise almost no settlements directly along that road. Consequently, population density within the road's immediate zone of impact is extremely low. Near Megri, the adjacent settlements account for only about 10,000 residents. Meanwhile, in the case of Armenia's northern route, including the Azerbaijani section, the corridor serves a population of over 1 million people. This means the route generates substantially higher economic activity, service demand, and localized economic multiplier effects. Therefore, developing the northern option aligns unequivocally with Armenia's interests. Naturally, Azerbaijan will not abandon the southern route. However, over time, when two operational options exist, one of which is shorter, more convenient, and offers a broader range of services, a significant portion of freight operators and travelers will naturally prefer the northern route. Ultimately, no operator will choose to travel hundreds of extra kilometers through desolate terrain when a route passing through Gyanja, Ijevan, Dilijan, Vanadzor, Gyumri, and onto Kars is available. Such a route is not only more attractive from a tourism standpoint, but also generates additional economic activity and spending within local economies. Consequently, the northern route represents an exceptionally promising direction. During the Soviet years, Armenia lacked a proper highway connection to Megri, except for the road running through Nakhchivan. The road over the Megri and Kajaran passes was unpaved, in poor condition, and hardly used. In practice, the road through Nakhchivan was utilized, and even more so, the railway. Furthermore, until the 1950s, the primary connection between Vayots Dzor and Shunik and the rest of Armenia also ran through Nakhchivan, via Sisian, the Bichanak Pass, and the Sharur-Yegegnya Dzor alignment, as it offered a flatter and far more practical route. Regarding mining, southern Armenia hosts the country's largest copper and molybdenum reserves. Near the village of Svarants lies the region's largest iron ore deposit, with explored reserves of around 1.5 billion tons. Back in 2011, a Chinese company expressed interest in developing this deposit. The project reached practical planning stages but was subsequently halted, primarily due to the lack of necessary infrastructure. Even during the Soviet era, plans existed to construct a rail line to Svarants so that mine output could be transported toward Kapan. Today, the north-south highway alignment will pass just 3 kilometers from that deposit. This will enable easy connections to the Megri railway station and facilitate future freight shipments toward both the Persian Gulf and Black Sea ports. Restoring rail links, particularly toward Megri, will also bring transformative changes to Armenia-Iran freight transport. Shipments can become significantly faster, cheaper, and larger in volume. Today's approximate 700,000 tons of freight are carried over challenging roads at significant cost in fuel and time. Therefore, opening communications through Nakhchivan on a reciprocal basis is highly beneficial for Armenia. Just as connecting to Nakhchivan via Megri is important for Azerbaijan, connecting to Megri and Kapan via Nakhchivan is equally important for Armenia. This interdependence is inherently positive if the logic of conflict and competition can be overcome. When both sides recognize their shared interests, it can exert a powerful positive impact not only on bilateral relations, but on the development of the entire region.